Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I want to do a couple of repots with you. I have a couple of plants that are starting to get too big for their containers, and the roots are starting to grow down like into the bottom of the reservoirs, so they need to go into something a little bit larger. And then I also have two couple of cuttings of my philodendron heteroecium that needs to be potted up. They've been sitting in a container of water in my kitchen window for like way too long. So those need to get potted. And I think that's all I have for today. Um, I don't have a big fancy little potting mat setup that I do upstairs. I actually am fortunate enough to have space in my basement. It is workable so that I can do all of my repots down there and I can keep all of my stuff organized, and kind of keep the mess contained to, one area. So I will be taking everyone downstairs to do my repot. So I will see you in a few. So like I said, I'm very fortunate that I have space downstairs in my basement that I am able to do my repotting so I can keep my mess to at least not in the way of the rest of the house. And I'm able to store like all of my plant supplies down here as well. It kind of needs to be organized. I had it organized a couple months ago, and then of course, it gets a little out of hand sometimes. But so this is kind of the overview of, I have some mother plants and some outdoor plants that overwinter in my house down here. But I'm able to keep all of like my soil supplies, all my soil making supplies, so like my perlites, um, leca, pon. um, I use some wood bark chips, for repti bark, in my mix, so I keep all of those down here. And then of course I have like extra pots and stuff that I can use. These are the ones that don't have holes in the bottom, so I can use those for like a reservoir for self-watering containers, because I tend to try and make my own if I can. It's just usually cheaper. Um, and then I have all my cups and things that I use for propagations, and just general. And then of course there's other basement items down here as well. So that's kind of an overview of just what I have um, down here for my plant setup. Okay, so the first plant that I have that I want to repot is a pothos snow queen. It's definitely in need of repotting. It's starting to grow right out of the pot, so she's ready. And then the second plant that I wanted to pot up into a larger container is my philodendron 69686. So this one is also starting to grow out of the pot a little bit, so it's time. And then the two cuttings I had are here, and they just were starting to get slimy in their container. And I'm really sorry, my heater just kicked on. So those definitely need to get potted back up. So I'm going to start with my philodendron 69686, and we'll see if we can find some larger pots for this to fit into. Okay, so I'm just going to be recycling some cups here. This one isn't a whole lot wider than the container I currently have this plant in, but it's like twice as deep, so I think that should be plenty for the roots, to give this a little bit of an extra head start until it gets up into the larger size nursery pots that I have. I don't have anything that would be small enough for this plant to go into from this size, so my next best is going to be to put it in something that's taller. rather than wider. So that's what I'm going to do for that plant. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the pothos as well. I'm just going to use those. The only thing that I'll have to do with these is to put a hole in the bottom for my wicking rope. I'm going to try and reuse the same wicking rope that's in these so that I don't have to cut fresh. I do sterilize those as well if I use them, so I do have a stack of some over here that I could potentially use as well, so I'll end up doing that before I use my fresh. But and then drain holes too, so that if I use any type of top fertilizer on my plants, when I water it through, it can at least drain into the reservoir that the wicking rope goes down into. Sometimes I usually, I try to use like a liquid fertilizer. So, just filling the bottom of the reservoir is fine because you can, the rope will soak it up. But occasionally I'll put worm castings or a mycorrhizal fungi on top. And obviously you have to water that through in order for it to do anything. So I want to have drain holes in the bottom of this to keep the excess water from building up. So that's the plan. And I also am going to take an opportunity to check the roots and make sure that nothing's going on with the plant itself. They both look healthy. I don't see any issues there. And this rope is really stuck in here. And I don't want to tug on it because sometimes the roots can stick to the wicking rope, so I try not to tug on it too much. And this one has, well, not too bad. Sometimes the roots I find will grow right through, and it did. So I have this length down here that I can keep, but the rest of the roots grew through the wicking rope at the top, so I'm just going to leave that attached. I'm not going to try and yank that off. The roots really aren't, they're not really as full as I thought. They just grew through the bottom, but it's not going to hurt it to put it in something a little bit larger and just give it a little bit more room to grow, so I don't have to do this again in another month or so. So now I'm going to put my hole in. I usually just use my cutting shears for that. I probably shouldn't, but these weren't really expensive and they do the job nicely, usually. Although today, I picked a cup with a really tough bottom, apparently. Let's pick a different spot. There. And now just a couple of drainage holes. I've seen some people use like a soldering iron to make the hole in the bottom for the wicking rope. And I did try that, and honestly it stunk and smoked so bad that I probably won't do that again because, again, I'm in my basement, so, that goes right upstairs. I don't want my house smelling like melted plastic. So the old-fashioned way it is, just poking a hole in it. And that one was way easier. And usually I do just like one, I'll usually do just one large hole for the wicking rope, and then I'll do like usually 4 smaller holes for drainage. This one is going to be a little difficult because the rope is still attached to the plant. And since I don't really want to have to cut a fresh one or waste this wicking rope if it's in there, I'm going to have to get at least it started out of the pot, and then I can fill with my mix, and then we'll tuck the plant down, add more mix, and then I can just pull the rope out. So now I'll just pull this through a little more until I can see it tugging on the roots of the plant a little bit, and that should be more than plenty for what I would need to make it down into this container. So I have plenty there. And you don't really need very much wicking rope. That's one of the things I found out the hard way doing self-watering containers, especially homemade ones. Everything that I saw online as far as other videos for plant people that do this, they never really said like how far up the cup the wicking rope needs to go. So I was pulling it all the way up and then wrapping it around the root ball of the plant, which is what I did with this one. And it's really not necessary to do that. You really only need the rope to go down as far as your cup would be, so whatever the reservoir is, and then just one straight shot up. It doesn't have to, you know, loop through the container that has your mix in it. And I found with a couple of my plants that that was actually too much moisture. It was wicking too much. And so I had to repot those fairly quickly so that they didn't rot. But yeah, that's not something that I've found mentioned too often when people are doing self-watering containers. Your wicking rope really doesn't need to be throughout the whole container, just up into the container, at least I would say half to 3/4 of the way into the container. And then, you know, the mix will grab the moisture that it needs. Knocking my containers over. So there we are. I have my plant in my mix. And I did bury it just a little bit further than what it was in the previous pot because there was a couple of growth points that had some roots that were starting. So just in an effort to give this plant a little extra room to root out, I did put that under the soil just a little bit. So it'll also provide a little more stability because this is a vining plant, and I didn't have it on a trellis the first time around because it was a starter plant, so it only had these two leaves on it down here, possibly this one. So it wasn't very large. It grew, this whole stalk that's wobbly since I bought it. So having those growth points down just a little bit further into the cup will give it a little more roots to kind of anchor it in, and then I can give it a trellis. This one, I'm still debating on whether or not I want to do just trellises for my climbers or moss poles. I feel like there's certain plants that really I don't want to say it doesn't benefit it, because having the extra moisture and nutrients further up the vine is always going to be beneficial to the plant. But I feel like as far as like if your goal is to get your plant to size up, I would say yes, you would want to do a moss pole. And I'm talking about just beyond, the initial maturity of the plant, really sizing up. It does benefit the plant to do a moss pole if that's the goal. For some of my climbers, I would like them to mature, but I don't necessarily need them to get massively huge. So I find that the maintenance of moss poles in those cases is not worth putting it on a moss pole. It will still mature as it grows up. It just needs something to attach to, or something that you can attach the plant to that will keep it vertical. So this one here, I want it to get the shape of the mature leaves, and it will, but I don't necessarily need them to get super massive. So for this plant, I'm just going to put it on either a pole or some type of trellis to keep it vertical so that it will mature, but not necessarily to get huge. And that'll be one less plant that I have to maintain on a moss pole, which is always good, especially when you have 400 plants. It gets a bit much to try and maintenance. So I'm just going to use just a bamboo stick to do my trellising for this plant. And I'm just going to try and be as gentle as possible so that I'm not damaging the plant. And I don't necessarily need for this to go all the way to the bottom of this container. I don't anticipate this plant being in this container when it gets to a point where it will be too top heavy. So I don't feel like this will do for now. For as long as this will be in this container, just having the stake halfway into my container is going to be more than enough to support this plant and keep it vertical without tipping over. Anything bigger than this, and it'll be too heavy for the entire container itself, let alone just the pole. So I'm not worried about jamming it all the way down. I just want it in there enough to be stable, and that I can attach the plant to with some of my Velcro tape, which I'm going to do right now. I save all of my old Velcros from things that have to come off poles or I chop, and then I just I put these in my oven along with my soil mix when I'm sterilizing my soil mixes or my leca or my pon. I don't boil those because I don't want to have to keep another container around just specifically to boil those in, because it will ruin your pot to do that. So I bake mine because I already have a couple of like cookie sheets that I have dedicated for sterilization of my potting mix. So usually what I'll do is I'll just toss this to the side on the mix and let it all sterilize, and then I can just brush it off if anything sticks to it, and then I can reuse it. Because I mean, this stuff's not expensive. It's like $5 for a roll, but I don't know, I just can't. I was brought up not to waste, and so if I can reuse it, I'm going to reuse it. So we're just going to give this guy a little bit of an attachment onto here. Kind of tight because he's wobbly, but not too tight that he can't continue to grow. So there we are. And we've got a stable plants. He's on there. And then a new container that I can fill with water. Usually this is about 1.5 inches or so of space. And I find that this kind of affords me about 1.5 weeks to 2 weeks of time before I have to, in between watering, so that I'm not having to water every 3 or 4 days. Previously, before I started putting things into self-watering containers, I just had everything planted into nursery pots. They were inside of a pretty pot, and then I would have to go around and water all of my plants every 2 to 3 days because, this mix isn't quite as chunky as my current mix. My current mix is a lot more chunky. So it was a lot of watering, and that was back when I only had like 200 plants. I've doubled it since then, and so self-watering containers are absolutely a must now. Otherwise, I'd probably drive myself insane watering plants. And then my containers, I'll just usually, in the summertime when it's nice out, I'll take them all outside and, rinse them, and then I just chuck them in a bin with a little bit of bleach water, let them dry, and then I reuse those as well. So next we are going to do my snow queen, And we're going to take a look what's going on with this plant. Being careful because I do have a lot of roots sticking out of the bottom of this one. Alright, and hopefully my wicking cord is going to be, it should be long enough. As long as this one is not wrapped, and this one definitely, we're starting to get roots that are growing in the direction of my container. So this one was definitely ready. More ready than the other one, but well, there's a couple of roots growing through the cord, and I definitely don't mind breaking those ones because they're small new roots. So and it has plenty. The other one didn't have quite as many roots growing through it, so I didn't want to detach the wicking cord. But now I will just fish my wicking cord up my container, and this is about as far as I'm going to let it go. And usually I try to keep it as close to the center as possible, but obviously, you know, you're putting a plant in there with roots, so if it doesn't quite make it in the center of my pot, it'll be, you know, kind of off to the side. And again, either way is fine as long as it's in the container. You know, everything will pull from that. Okay, so this time I can actually fill my container and then put my plant in, and I don't have to pull that down just a smidge. And so I have it, no, not quite half, but close. And then I'll put my plant in, and I'll just kind of hold my wicking cord off to the side, tuck my plant in, and make sure my roots are pointing down as much as possible. Sometimes they kind of wing out in whatever direction they feel like. Now this plant has a vine started, but this is the only Snow Queen pothos that I have. It took me a long time to get this plant going because it just had some issues. use a stack over here, but these ones aren't sterilized, so I'm not going to use them. I'll use a fresh one. And this one, because I'm probably not going to keep these cuttings. I had taken the mother plant that I took these from is a little bare on top, so I took quite a few cuttings from the length, and rooted those out and potted them up, and I just happened to miss these two, so I'm not going to disturb the plant, you know, a month later to just add these two cuttings. And it's pretty full now, so I'm happy with the way it looks, but you know, I'm not going to waste these, so I'm going to pop these up into just a clear cup. And then every May, first Saturday in May, my town has like a huge townwide yard sale, and it's pretty popular in our area. So I'm just going to pop these up. I'll put them in my grow tent, and then I'll probably put these out with a bunch of other cuttings that I have started up that I'm not going to keep. And then that way somebody else can enjoy having plants. Now for that one, because I'm not going to keep this plant, I'm not going to use my super expensive mix. I'm going to use the mix of older stuff that I have. It still has a fair amount of the same ingredients that my regular, you know, my good stuff has, but I used like pumice in this, and it's just, pumice is hard to get a hold of, and it's expensive, so we are going to go, and I'm going to move you guys around. So we're going to go with the stuff that I have already sterilized, and this is my setup. I have just, it's a metal, I think they call it a metal baker's rack from Home Depot with the slats in it, and I used to use this to grow my vegetables in, because I would grow all of my vegetables for my garden outside in this, and then I would hang the lights, but I don't grow as many now, and I have the grow tent, so a lot of my stuff goes in there, so now I use it for doing my repots, so I can just put my container on top, and then I can make a mess and it goes right back down into my bin, so that I'm not wasting any mix. And this stuff will be a little more water retentive too, because sometimes when I put things in my grow tent, I tend the water, I forget to water. So, you know, if I'm going a little further in between waterings, I want to make sure that the soil is going to hold on to that moisture just a smidge longer than my good mix. My good mix requires either a self-watering container or probably every 2 to 3 days to be watered, where I tend to not check on my grow tent for probably 2 weeks. Sometimes 3. So I want something that's going to hold more moisture, and this is going to do it. So that is that. And here she is. I'll pot it up. Okay, so now we're upstairs. We're going to get ready to put these two in their new homes, because this one might still fit where I had it previously, but this one here is going to be a little too tall with the stake for me to put it back in the spot where I had it. So I am going to add a little bit of worm castings to the tops. Try to do this one-handed. And then I can water this in with the fertilizer water that I have. I don't use anything fancy. I just use Captain Jack's all-purpose fertilizer. Everybody seems to like it. I do use a different fertilizer for foliar feeds for my Hoyas and my orchids, but these guys won't get that. They'll just get regular Captain Jack's. So I'm gonna water that in. Try and get some of that worm castings down in the container. And since my soil mix was pretty dry, it's probably going to soak this up fast. So because these are fresh repots, and I didn't keep the original soil mix in them, sometimes like I pull them out, and I'm able to, you know, I'll reuse the soil. But if it drops away from the root ball when I'm pulling it out of the previous pot, I usually won't bother to reuse that. I'll just dump it in my buckets to sterilize for the next time. But because we're getting close to the top of the container, the bottom of the actual container with the plants. So I'm going to stop that one. The soil mix is very dry, so I'll probably have to water these again in a couple of days, because I'm sure that these plants will have soaked up whatever extra moisture is in the reservoir. Now we can take these guys and we can set them into their spots. So this guy and the other one originally lived here underneath this table that I have in front of my bookshelf. I have a grow light down there and it still fits, so we're going to keep that one there. But this one is going to be too tall. So this one is going to go up on top of the cabinet, and then there is a light up here at the top that shines up. So we're going to set them up there, and I think he's going to like it up there. So that's it. So that is the process that I use for repotting. Not too terribly complicated and pretty normal compared to most people's, except for the fact that I can do mine in my basement, where I can make a mess and then sweep it up and it's fine. Caramel. My supervisor. He likes to follow me around when I do plant chores, so that'll be it for today's video. Hopefully you were able to get something out of it. Again, like I said, with the wicking rope, that wasn't something that I ever really saw in any of the videos that I watched on, when I first started getting into plants. How to start up your own self-watering containers. Usually the ones that you buy on Amazon or like at the store, they'll come with either a wicking rope, or if it's a container that's meant for leca or pond, it won't have a wicking rope. It'll just have the little webbing at the bottom, usually on little feet, stilted feet, so that the water can come into contact with that and then wick up from there. So don't make the mistake I made when I first started doing my own self-watering pots, putting too much wicking rope in the container. Usually, like I said, like halfway to maybe 3/4 is all you really need. And as long as the rope is touching the bottom of the container that you're using to keep your water in, it should be fine. So hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys in the next one.